Hello and welcome to another episode of My Pocket Psych, the podcast all about the psychology of the workplace. I'm your host, Dr. Richard McKinnon, chartered psychologist and coach. And this time around, I'm joined by another member of the WorkLifePsych team, Lucie Ilbury, who is also a chartered coaching psychologist. Lucie, how are you doing today?
I'm really well, thank you, Richard. The sun is out and it feels like spring is on the way, so really good.
I'm glad it is where you are, because here in London it is just so grey and overcast. But yeah, let's hope spring is on the way. Before we dive into today's topic, I just want to share a few news and updates for our listeners or our viewers. First of all, we recently had our 150 episodes milestone. And I just want to thank everyone for all the feedback. I had lots and lots of messages from people who've been either listening for a long time or it was one of the first episodes. But thank you. If you got in touch, whether on social media or you dropped me an email, that was really nice. So I really, really appreciate that. And as I intimated there, our episodes for the last few and going forward are also going to be available as a video on YouTube. If you're listening to this and you like video, you can find everything over on WorkLifePsych.tv. That's our YouTube channel, where we have a broad range of different videos about the kind of topics we work on: coaching, well-being, productivity at work, that kind of thing. One of the things I bang the drum for very regularly on the podcast is our online personal development community, WorkLifePsych Club. Each month we have a free online meetup where members can join live for a chat, a discussion about a topic that's relevant to our development at work. And this month, March 2024, the meetup is scheduled for March 27th. It's going to take place at 12 p.m. UK time. And the topic this time around is a bit of an evergreen topic when it comes to skills in the workplace, and it's difficult conversations. So we'll be focusing on what makes them difficult, how do we navigate that difficulty or that discomfort, and what are the kind of pitfalls that we might want to look out for and try and avoid when we need to have these conversations. And I will be reminding everyone that scheduling them for tomorrow is not really a long-term solution. And my final update this time around is to remind everyone that our new newsletter is live, but you can find it at the old link. So if you've subscribed already, you'll get it, and that's not a problem. No change required. But if you want to have a look, you can read it online at worklifepsych.news. Okay, so today we're going to talk about values. I'm going to talk about values from a slightly different perspective because it's a topic that is featured on the podcast quite a bit over the years because it's very central to the work that we do with our clients, bringing values to life and helping people understand the role that values can play in their life. But we also know that if we don't explain it or we don't go into great depth, and sometimes even when we do, it's possible that we can misunderstand what we mean by values, or we might put them into action in a way that's not particularly helpful. So today we want to talk about that, the pitfalls that it's important to avoid when we're focused on and we're using our values. Lucie, is that what you were expecting to hear from me?
Absolutely. I'm really looking forward to unpacking this. It feels like this is something that is so powerful for people when we're working, whether it's in a coaching context or more generally working with people around their development. So looking forward to just bringing this to life a little bit more today.
I like that phrase, bringing it to life, because one of the challenges with values is that they can be very conceptual and they might just take the form of a poster or a mouse mat in the workplace. These are our values. What we're talking about here are the values that we hold as an individual. Now, the organizational values are relevant, but it's what we ourselves see as our values. And as we'll see, it's not enough to know what those are. We need to use them. We need to do something with them. But before looking at the pitfalls, so let's look at the essentials of what we mean by values, because that itself is a difficult one to pin down. Often in coaching contexts, I will intimate that one of the most difficult things you can ask someone is to look at a blank piece of paper and answer the question, what are your values? It's really challenging unless you've given it an awful lot of thought. So establishing what we mean by values at the very beginning is really important. I want to share a few different perspectives on this, and I'd love to hear yours as well, Lucie. How do you bring it to life for people that you're working with? That's actually one of the first ways I approach it. These are the personal qualities that we want to bring to life practically. They're ways of being in the world. So that means that they're not something like thoughts that come and go or emotions that come and go. They're sort of long-standing qualities. They're ways that we would like to direct our attention and direct our behavior. So often, actually, we define values by saying what they're not. They're not thoughts and emotions. So that's a really important point. They can also serve as an internal compass. And this is an image that I think lands quite nicely with people. They remember it. If you use a compass, it gives you a sense of direction. It doesn't tell you exactly what to do, though, but it just says that way is north, that way is south. And you can't mess that up. If a compass is working, it's telling you very clearly that's that direction. But it doesn't tell you how to walk that way or how to get over that obstacle. It just says that's the direction you want to go. And the direction of travel is what's really important when it comes to development or navigating difficulties. It helps us move away from thinking about perfection or success. It's more just moving in that desired direction. How about you, Lucie? When you're talking about values, do those descriptions resonate with you in the way that you do it?
Definitely. I think what always comes to mind for me, and I think what can become particularly powerful when bringing this idea to life, I'm quite a visual person, so this may not speak to everybody, but almost this idea of being a ship at sea. Particularly when you've encountered rough waters, actually, and just being able to use our values, as you say, about our inner compass, giving us broadly the direction that we would go in to return to safety, but not necessarily every step that we would need to take to get the boat back on course or find our way across those difficult tides. So I think just something quite visual really can bring this idea to life as well, depending on what speaks to you as an individual.
That's really nice, isn't it? Because you can use different images. You can be quite creative in how you describe this. That's what's memorable. That's what sticks, and that's what people can use. And the navigation metaphor is a really nice one because it's not about following a checklist. And we often use the metaphor of a journey in coaching and in development more broadly, whether it's the steps you take, the goals, the destinations, all that kind of thing. But yeah, the sense of direction and how you can use it to get back to where you want to be, which is a really nice way of thinking about values, because even if you take the time to figure out what your values are, some of them may be aspirational, as in, I don't do it now. I would like to do it, or I used to do it, but I don't do it now, and that feels a bit icky. And so getting back on course is a really nice way of considering that. When you talk about values, is it generally well received?
I think definitely when we sort of really look at what we mean by values, it feels like for many people it's a different way of thinking about how to navigate the world and how to navigate the experiences that we encounter and the different relationships that we build, particularly for the work that I do in the workplace. I think probably a question that comes up really frequently that it would be great to hear your thoughts on as well, Richard. But when we think about values, I think sometimes people can confuse that with goals and how those two concepts sort of relate to one another. I don't know what your sort of advice or guidance is when you're working with someone about the difference between the two.
I think that's probably the number one confusion, that, well, these are both things we want, so they must be the same. And so on the one hand, it's really helpful when our goals and values are aligned and they're in the same direction, and using our values and leaning into those values can help us achieve those goals. And if they're not aligned, it helps us understand why we feel uncomfortable about them. This is not a desired outcome for me. Maybe it's been given to me by my manager, for example, but it helps me understand. Now, I can use my values to achieve the goal even when I don't want it, but that's the core difference. We achieve our goals. We don't achieve our values. They stay with us. And I think that's a really good starting point for exploring the difference between those. I'm going to link in the show notes to a video I recorded about this because it's something that people really often ask. So I have it in my evergreen content section on the YouTube channel. But it is that you get the promotion achieved. That's the goal. But you remain professional or career-minded or dedicated, whatever the value is that's relevant to that. You don't switch your values off, or you don't leave them behind because they're done. They come with you on the journey of your life. You may pay attention to the different values to different degrees during different stages in your lifespan, but they're with you. The goals come and go, and we might find ourselves achieving a goal that's not meaningful to us because it's just necessary. Whereas the values, by their very nature, they need to be authentic. They need to be how we want to be in the world. So there are a few ways of putting some space between those concepts. Does that make sense for starters?
I think it's such a helpful distinction to make. And again, great to hear about your experience of this, but it feels like that's quite a profound shift in thinking. I think we spend so much of our lives waiting to achieve the next thing or gearing ourselves up to just tick something off the to-do list. But it just listening to you speak there, I think it sounds like we're repositioning that focus quite significantly when we think about values in contrast with goals.
Absolutely, because you could easily think of goals as being large, monumental achievements, and they can be. But one thing we want to avoid is thinking of values as being something we only do when it's super important, when it's a major life decision. We want to use them every day. And in fact, it's easier to bring our values to life every day than it is to achieve a big goal every day.
Yeah.
And that future focus on goals, as we discussed on a previous episode with Rachel, that future focus can mean that we're not focused on the here and now because we're just thinking about the next goal, the next achievement. When I get X, I'm going to feel Y. Often achieved, feeling a sense of accomplishment or success, but it's all future focused. So we have the opportunity in this moment to bring values to life. And it sits with us because it doesn't have to be a really big, showy behavior or even a big demanding behavior. It's something that we can do here and now. And what research has showed us consistently for decades is when we're able to bring our values to life, it's just good for us. It's good for our well-being. It's good for our goal attainment. It's good for our job satisfaction. If we can be values aligned, it's just a helpful thing. We need to know what our values are to begin with, but we then can, bring them to life in very, very small ways with a very low threshold and get a really great result. And there's not many things in life that work that way. Most of the time, you have to put a lot of effort in to get a big result, right?
Absolutely. And I think it's just reframing it in that way again, sort of unlocking something quite simple, actually, in principle, which can give us so much meaning and so much focus. So, again, really interested in your views on this, Richard. But where do you think people sometimes get unstuck when it comes to trying to live their values? What can kind of get in the way of that process?
That's a big question. So I can think of so many examples to begin with. I would say with the kind of people I work with in a coaching context, busyness, having a demanding role, having a demanding set of responsibilities inside and outside of work, values can feel like a luxury. What they're working on, as you intimated earlier, is my to-do list. I just need to do the things. Of course, we get up the next day and there's another to-do list and another to-do list. We never get to the end of that. And so it's almost refreshing to look at life through the lens of values. It doesn't mean that the to-dos aren't important anymore, but they sit at the correct level of a hierarchy. In a sense, they're important, but they're not what brings our life meaning and purpose. And that's what values are all about. We're acting in a way that is going to get us the kind of experience we want from life rather than, look, my list is all ticked off. I'm actually pointing at a list right now. But look, my list is all ticked off. Yeah, but there'll be another list tomorrow.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's how we go about ticking off that list as well. So, we know from the concept of things like competencies in the workplace, we can achieve what's required of us in a job role, but the way that we actually go about doing that, the way that we interact with our colleagues, the way that we perform the tasks that are required of us makes a big difference to how effective we are in our job more broadly. And it feels like that's quite similar when it comes to living our values. We can have our to-do list, we can have our our goals. But if we're also really careful to ensure that we're approaching those in a way that's aligned with what matters to us at a slightly more profound level, that's sort of part of the process of living those values, which, as you say, I'm sure busyness can definitely be a key obstacle to at times.
Totally. And I actually had a coachee in the past who fed this back to me, which I immediately stole, but I told them at the time, I'm going to steal this, that actually this focus on goals is the what I'm going to do, but the values is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And
Nice.
that's literally what you just explained in a really nice way. But that is it. You can achieve anything, but are you going to leave a trail of destruction behind? You can achieve anything, or are you going to hurt yourself and your well-being in an effort to do that? If you're bringing your values into the mix, then you're remembering the why and the how, as well as the what needs to be done. Now, that's more work for us, right? But it gets us a better result. And it doesn't need to be hugely taxing. It doesn't need to be hugely demanding, but it is necessary to remember the how I'd like to be as I do this thing. And it makes all the difference. And in a sense, and probably misusing the word here, but it's a little bit addictive, because once you're putting your values in action, it feels good. You want to do more of it. And then you realize, I get this great feeling, this great sense of satisfaction that was maybe missing before, because I was focused on something else that's not as satisfying, that's not as fulfilling.
Absolutely. And I guess sort of building on that as well, one thing that I've encountered before is it can sometimes feel quite challenging when we find ourselves in context where maybe our values don't necessarily align with the values of other people that we're working with. Is that something you've come across either yourself personally or when coaching others?
I was going to say my entire career. But no, it's a fact of life. And actually, I think that's one of the big misunderstandings with the values. It's either I can only, get along with people who share my values, or the flip side, that if we don't share values, that means we're in conflict. And in fact, we don't know the values of the people around us truly unless they tell us. We can infer through observation, but that implies that all of us are always acting in accordance with our values all the time, and we know we're not. So something that can really help us with that is to be more open about what matters to us. That is the tagline for values. My values, what matters to me in life. And if we're more open and we can signpost to each other a little bit more clearly what that is, then we can understand that, well, just because your values are different doesn't mean we can't work well together or get along. And in fact, even if your values are different, our behavior might work really, really well together. And at a bare minimum, we can get the job done. We don't have to be best friends. We can get the job done. And in fact, you could find people who share values or share espoused values, and they're butting heads constantly because they're maybe not listening. They're maybe not paying attention to the moment. They're maybe a bit absorbed in their own perspective and they're not paying enough attention. But when I work with teams and we talk about values, I think one of the best things I see in team building, team development environments is people really clearly signposting their perspective on the world and what's important to them. And that's very different to their skills, their personality, their career goals. This is what really matters to me fundamentally. And people learn a lot about each other. And then you can use that to more effectively communicate, deliver bad news, motivate each other. But you need to get it out on the table and not just assume.
And I guess there's a really interesting nuance there, because hearing about the work that you did with a team in a team coaching context feels like there's a huge amount of opportunity for values to connect us with other people that we work with or other people more broadly. But there's also a risk, I would imagine, that sometimes when we share our values with others, we present them more as if they're an excuse for behaviour or problematic interactions with colleagues. Is that something that resonates from your experience?
I think it's something to be aware of, that we run the risk of over-identifying with a part of our identity, and our values are part of that. So if you say, the reason I raised my voice in the meeting was because being on time is one of my values. Well, no, that's your value. That's important to you. I've maybe described it this way one to one, but not publicly, but it's a little bit like religion. Your religion asks you to do these things. You can't expect it of people who don't have the same religion. You follow your guidance and restrictions, but you can't ask that of other people. And when we think about my values, I can't then use that as an excuse for behavior that has a negative impact on others or is disruptive or is unfair. And I can't demand those values of anyone else because they're not their values, they're my values. And even if they say they share the values, they could mean something different to them. So, to go back to your earlier analogy, I'm in my ship with my compass and you're in your ship with yours. Let's remember that. We might, go on a similar journey, but this is my ship and I'm in charge of keeping it on its direction, not yours. And I think that's a point that's really well made, that it's a risk we run once we're really clear on what's important to us. We assume, doesn't everyone think this? Doesn't everyone feel this is the way the world should be? And I think we both know that's not the case. Once you talk to people, you realize there's a lot of diversity of thought and opinion out there.
Absolutely. And I guess we've talked a bit about maybe having conflicting values with others or just having a different compass to guide the ship, I think is a really nice way of thinking about that. This is probably going to speak volumes about me, but I would also imagine sometimes we can have multiple values that sometimes we can find actually at conflict within ourselves. So maybe we find ourselves in a situation where we've got a value related to learning and development, but also one related to work-life balance and wanting to make sure we get enough downtime. And how do we make sure that we're reconciling those values and following through in a way that's going to be productive for us and helpful for us given our psychology? Again, is that just me or is that something you've come across?
I was going to say, have you been watching me? This is a conversation I had just yesterday, actually. We all have multiple values, but it's impossible for us to live them all concurrently in the moment. Right? So what we're doing, if we're being values aligned, is paying attention to the context we're in the moment we're in, and just making an intentional decision about what we're going to do next. So it's not a box ticking exercise. Have I done values 1 to 10 today? But more a case of, these are the options presented to me in this moment. Which of them is more likely to get me where I want to be in a way that I want to get there? And so that may mean that on one day, and it's really resonating with me, on one day I might say, I'm going to take another hour to finish watching this video because I want to learn more about it. And on another day, I might say, I'm packing up now and I'm going home because I don't want to be late for dinner with my partner because that's really important to me. And maybe I've had feedback to that effect that I should get home on time more often. It depends is the really unsatisfying answer to most of these. And it's one of the things to avoid. If we start treating values like rules to be adhered to, we're missing the whole point. Values are flexible principles. They're not things that we can, quantify, done, not done, or give ourselves a score on. Because if we treat them like rules, then we're missing out on the opportunity to be flexible. But we all know about rules that when we break a rule, there's consequences. So we can feel terrible. We can feel bad if we somehow break these rules. That was finger inverted commas for anyone who's listening and not watching.
Absolutely. And I guess it sort of underlines this point around values not being the same as goals. We don't achieve our values. It's something that we need to continually keep in mind, work on, and I'd imagine let them help us guide ourselves when we're in calm waters, as well as maybe when things get a little bit choppy. Is that something, again, that you think is useful to be mindful of? I imagine for some people, sort of saving up our values for these very big challenges or very big decisions can feel like it's more manageable than maybe living them day to day.
Well, in the variety or the diversity of coaching conversations you might have, you approach similar topics from different directions, depending on the person you're speaking with. And so with this in mind, sometimes we'll look at values-led or values-aligned behavior through the lens of skill. So the more you do it, the better you get at it, or the more natural it feels to do it, the more likely it is for that behavior to manifest. Another is to view it through the lens of habits. Just doing this small thing on a daily basis. It represents the value, it's a touch point, and you could notice how it feels over time to do this thing. It's almost symbolic to you that you're living your values. But if you just get clear on the values, and they're living in a note or a post-it note or on your phone, but then you have a big choice to make. You won't know what it's like to use those values. It will be like, the compass is in a box below deck and you only get it out during a storm. Well, you haven't used it, so you don't know how to interpret what it's telling you. So that calm water, storm water analogy works really well, because using it in the everyday brings skill. And then we know what it's like to move in that direction. We also know what it's like to move away from those values and how that feels. So we're calibrating. And then when we really do need to make a big decision or choose between some options, and we know what it's like to bring the values to life. And that means that we're more likely to get a result that's in line with those values, rather than I live a life on automatic pilot, and then when I'm choosing a new job, I think about my values. That's a kind of an extreme example, but that's what it could look like. You're not bringing them to life in the everyday.
It's a really nice way of putting it, and it feels like the more that we practice, but also the way that we practice can be quite key to that. So I'm just thinking of some of the techniques and tools I know a lot of the people I work with find really useful, things like journaling, where actually we can just become more mindful and aware of how we're relating to the world, how we are being in the world, which can be a really useful way of just helping us to hone that skill and practice it more effectively over the longer run. Is that, again, something that sort of speaks to you?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really nice point, that we're learning as we're doing it. So again, it's the opposite of something like goal attainment, where it's done, it's done. This is, think about the diversity of situations you could find yourself in. How can I flexibly bring these values to life in these very different situations? And it could be, I'm thinking in the everyday, if you want to bring compassion to life, that could be everything from letting someone go before you to go through a door into a building, all the way through to, canceling an engagement to spend time with a friend who's going through a tough time of it. Both of those are example of compassion. One isn't better than the other. It might be you don't have the opportunity to spend time with a friend, or that there's something more demanding you need to take care of, but they're both manifestations of the same thing. And the more we're able to make that connection between doing and how it feels, and we're noticing the result as well. And I think that's an important distinction, that we've got that feedback loop when we're living our values. We do the thing, we notice the impact, and we notice how we feel about it. So it's less automatic, it's less automatic pilot. It's not, which is probably another one of these traps we could easily fall into. Have I done my values today?
Yes.
Tick.
Yeah.
Rather than actually, these are presenting themselves, these opportunities are presenting themselves. So I might do some things every day that support my values, that support the manifestation of them. Maybe some self-care routines, maybe some learning, like doing a bit of reading or something, or maybe it is checking in with a friend. But as we go through the day, there'll be lots of opportunities to bring our values to life, and being in the moment allows us to notice those opportunities and not feel bad about it afterwards, because we weren't paying attention. We were caught up being busy or something.
Yes, yeah. And I guess also that sometimes that feels hard, and that's okay. That's another sort of theme that comes up for me quite a lot, both personally and also when working with others. It doesn't always have to be something that's completely comfortable. Sometimes living our values is tough. Is that, again, something you...
Yeah. I suppose maybe I might leave people with the wrong impression, the way I'm talking about it, that it's not always completely clear. We're making a decision. We're choosing from options. We're giving it a go. That doesn't mean it's success. That doesn't mean we're doing it correctly, if that is even a thing. It doesn't mean we're guaranteed to get the result we're expecting, but at least we're moving intentionally in that direction, rather than doing something automatically or leaving it up to a coin toss. and we're doing it for the right reason. That's something that comes up an awful lot in the work we do using ACT, or acceptance and commitment theory. We're moving towards what's important rather than moving away from some kind of discomfort that we just don't want to feel. So values help us notice the difference between the two. Am I, I mentioned it at the top of the episode, am I trying to avoid a difficult situation, a difficult conversation? Or am I putting my values in action and giving this person feedback because it's really important that I do that?
Yeah.
So that could feel really difficult, but be worthwhile. And that's probably a good way to distinguish between those. When we do something that is values aligned, it brings us a sense of satisfaction. Doesn't mean we're going to be happy about it. We may not feel joy. So we don't want to conflate values with happiness. We can feel a bit grim. We could feel a bit, ooh, that's rough, and put our values into action. We might feel very happy and free and easy because we're ignoring those things, or we're procrastinating about those decisions, or we're only doing pleasant things. That's not values aligned. So I think you've raised one of the most fundamental things to know about values, that it's not always easy, it's not always fun, it doesn't always bring joy, but it brings satisfaction and meaning and purpose, and they last far longer than a volatile emotion that's, coming and going really quickly.
So it's such an important point.
So this, I probably should have said it at the very outset, is not intended as a criticism of anyone listening or watching. These are things that all of us as fallible humans can do, regularly, but it is also forewarned is forearmed. If we know these are things that humans do, it's useful to look out for them. And the reflection that you mentioned, the journaling, the thinking about it, can help us notice what we've done and what we might do differently next time, rather than just, oh, that felt bad, I'll beat myself up, or I'll avoid it in the future. Like, I could do it differently. I could do more of this, less of that. It's intentionality. We're deciding we're going to do it. We're not at the mercy of events. And that's where this whole intentional living and values comes together really nicely, because life can be chaotic. And, and if we acknowledge what's within our control, one of the things is our behavior. And if that behavior is values aligned, no matter what's going on around us, at least we know we're doing that. And that's good for us. So it's really, really fundamental stuff.
This principle of calibration just really came to mind, that none of us are the finished product. We all have things that we may continue to want to refine, continue to want to develop and invest in, and actually different situations, different contexts require slightly different things from us. So actually how we can over time just make sure that we're calibrating how we're living our values across these different situations feels like it's something that's also quite useful to be mindful of.
We find ourselves in different situations, life situations. We might find ourselves, because of work, we might find ourselves going through a period of having to do lots of business travel and take us away from home. So how can we bring our values to life when we're not with our loved ones? Or we might go through a particularly busy period at work with a very demanding workload. How can we still be a values-led person? Or going through the ambiguity of change, organizational change. That can be really tough for people. And it can feel like a good excuse to just go into yourself and go into protective mode and avoid rather than explore and keep moving towards what's important to you in that context. So it reiterates, they're not rules. It's not a simple checklist, and it's something that will change over time. That's fine, because we change over time. And what was super important to me when I was 18 has changed a little bit a few years later, but that's fine because we grow and we develop. And so values clarification is something that's useful, not to just do it and file it away, but revisit it over time to say, what is important to me right now? What's the most important stuff? Let me put that front and center and not cling on to sort of outdated views of who I am or what I think should be important to me. And maybe we'll close with that point, which is the authenticity is something that comes up in values discussions and coaching all the time. This should be one of my values. Why? Why do you think that? Well, don't people all have this value? Not at all. They might say they do, but there's no point in having a socially acceptable or social socially desirable set of values if they're not really who you want to be. And once you do that, that's quite liberating. Once you realize that's not important to me, it's actually quite a nice thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And very freeing, I would imagine, in terms of just feeling that's okay to be able to authentically be yourself and hold on to what matters to you as an individual.
Absolutely. I'd love to frame that. That's a really nice way of putting it. Thank you. Thank you. Listen, we're going to wrap up at this point. I'd love to hear from listeners or viewers. What do you think of when you read or hear the word values? Have you developed some cynicism about it over the years because of how it's dealt with in the workplace? Have you done any work on your own values? Have you tried and clarified it for yourself? How do you bring it to life? We'd love to hear from you. You can email us, podcast@worklifepsych.com, or you can simply leave a comment underneath the video on YouTube, or you can get in touch with us on any of the social channels. We're WorkLifePsych on all of them pretty much. Let us know what you think. And of course, any follow-up questions about this. I always finish these episodes thinking, yeah, I've drawn a line under that. And then of course, questions come, you think, yes, I could have done such a better job answering or covering that. So your questions really do help us get better and better. Oh no, me, not us, you're great. Better and better at these things. Lucie, thank you so much for joining me today. It was great to talk this through with you. Thank you everyone out there for listening to this episode. We really do appreciate the listenership and the viewership on YouTube. Thanks for listening and watching, and we'll see you next time.